Today, we are going to debate a very important issues. From my position as a General Director of the Teacher Creativity Center in Palestine, as well I am the President of the Arab Campaign for Education for All, and as a Vice President of the Global Campaign for Education for All, this topic was a hot topic during the last 2 years. This House believes that the purpose of education is to ensure children get good jobs when they leave school. Today we have two teams, against and for. The team who will support this motion: Nicole Golden, Consultant World Bank Group USA; Joseph Okilo, Executive Director, McKinney Group of School, Kenya. And the team who will be against: Dino Varki, Group Executive Director, Board Members of James Education, UAE; and Alessandro Fosica, Head of Cabinet of Ministry of Education, University of Research, Italy. Before giving a general introduction, I would like to have initial vote for the topic. So if we can start the vote, you will see 1 agree, 2 disagree. And we will have 10 seconds to finish the survey. Can we start?
I just pressed it many times, you know, like American Idol.
Early and often. Early and often.
Good. The result will be at the end.
Yesterday they put it.
So, as maybe all of you know, that each one of from each team will be, we will give him 7 minutes. The first one from the first team will produce a definition of a scope of the motion. And the first speaker from the second team, which is against, he will present, he will produce a case for opposition and repeat the opening speaker to a degree. The second one from the first team will present a new argument for extend the argument for the motion, while the second speaker from the second team will present a new argument or extend the argument against the motion. He will construct the 4 speakers. After that, we will try to give the floor, the space to ask some question, and then we will give 3 minutes to each one of the team to summarize the result. But also we want the speakers to be hot in their speaks. Actually, before giving you, I will tell you that really, from my experience, was a very hot debate among all the educators and advocates who work in educational social movement. What is the role of the education? Are we preparing the children for the market? Are we meet the need of the market? Or the education should meet the learners' needs? Are we producing the children to be prepared for the private sector? Or we are working to produce a children to be prepared for the life, for the humanity. Between making the school serve the market, or the school serve the values, is a really big difference. It came, as you know, in between what we call the privatization of education. So are we considering the education service or rights? All this came to this discussion. And believe me, this discussion will continue for the coming maybe 10 years. And as you know, all the discussion post 2015, was the heart of the discussion. In Senegal, a question raised: why we are sending the children to school if they don't learn? Why we are not preparing them from the first to find a job? This is, I think, today we hope to contribute to this dilemma that it's going and will still going among all the education actors. Now we will start with the first speaker from the team 4. Please.
It's very generous. You're clapping already. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be here and speak to you all in this chamber. We submit to this chamber that purpose is one's reason for doing something, their intent, their motivation, their objective. We submit that education is the act or process of learning as much as it is the end product. And we further submit that good jobs are those that offer safe and sustainable livelihoods. And enable individuals to care for themselves and their families, as well as to contribute to society and offer a sense of self-worth, of meaning, and of passion for their life. These good jobs, as I've described them, are indeed in short supply. As young people the world over are facing an underemployment crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen, especially for this largest youth generation in human history, half the world's population being under the age of 30. A crisis that is taking an economic and social toll to our most valued asset, our children, and wreaking havoc on the global economy and fueling the fires of instability and conflict. Indeed, young people around the world are up to 4 times more likely to be unemployed. 1 in 4 youth today can't find a job where they make more than $1.90 a day, the global poverty line. And these are the facts, and we have to confront the facts. And we submit that the jobs crisis is underpinned by an education and learning crisis. While we acknowledge that education has many benefits, we believe and we submit to this chamber that if the purpose of education, the primary purpose of education, is not to prepare children for work, then education will not be designed and delivered purposefully, and thus will fail to deliver and prepare children and provide the hope and opportunity they so deserve and want. Across the world, the workforce is ill-prepared for the economy, especially as it's changing with globalization, with technology, and shifting demands for skills and competencies. In Europe, one study showed roughly a quarter of youth remain unemployed, yet vacancies are on the rise. And as we've heard time and time again, the young people, children are not coming out of school prepared and ready to take these jobs. One study shows that between 25 and 45% of workers are either underskilled for jobs. In Southeast Asia, where there are increasing number of higher skills jobs becoming available, this mismatch is expected to be by 2025, 10% in Vietnam, 25% in the Philippines, and a staggering 65% in Indonesia of young people being unprepared. The International Labor Organization did a study across 27 countries, low and middle income countries, and found that less than half employees were actually well matched for jobs, and a further 40% were underskilled. So this is an issue the world over. And we believe we must be intentional about what we teach, how we teach, where we teach, and even who teaches. The question, we believe, isn't whether education ultimately improves lives. It can improve lives in ways beyond getting a job. We believe it does. But the question is whether you can realize other benefits as a byproduct of education regardless, and we believe it can. But without intent, without purpose, without reforming curricula and pedagogy to prepare children for work, this outcome, this purpose will not be realized. President Obama once said that education is the economic challenge of our time. And indeed, in billions of families and households around the world, families are too often forced to make a choice, forced to make a value proposition and assess the opportunity cost of sending their children to school, especially their girls. They're forced to evaluate whether it's worth it to send their child to school, in many cases, or not have them work. And indeed, when we make the case for girls' education, it is often about the economic case. We know that an additional year of schooling can bring 10 to 20% more earnings to a girl in their life. And that, with that income, with that job, with that earning potential, can come increased equity, increased value in the household. Job readiness scores and job placement rates have become the currency of credibility, if you will, for many educational institutions and for skills and training programs. So we believe that education is the most important investment we can make in our children. And we submit that the case is clear that we must ensure good jobs are the return on that investment. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning, Speaker, Honorable Opposition, members of this House. To build consensus and a common vision around the purpose of education may be one of the most difficult tasks that any one of us may undertake. The purpose of education will inevitably be subjective, entirely dependent on context, history, and perspective that you choose to take. Education, in its forms and methods, is an outgrowth of the needs of the society in which it exists, said by John Dewey in 1934. Therefore, a part of me would be inclined to agree with the motion before the House that the purpose of education is to ensure that children get good jobs when they leave school. However, let me rephrase. I would agree if we lived in the past. We are living through the information and technology revolution, whereas this motion is better associated with the relic that was the Industrial Revolution. We are living in times of rapid, unprecedented, globally interconnected change where 70% of the jobs of tomorrow do not exist today. How then do we prepare our children for that future? Certainly a view of the purpose of education that is focused primarily on securing jobs will only serve to widen the gap between those that succeed and those that do not. Because we simply do not know the extent to which jobs will survive displacement by digitalization, robotics, or artificial intelligence. Furthermore, propagating an archaic, efficiency-based purpose of education does nothing, and I repeat, does nothing to draw attention to the skills, qualities, and values that our children and our world truly need. Those skills and qualities that will survive the rapidly changing nature of work. Today, we have 500 million children in failing schools around the world. Tomorrow, if we choose to follow this narrow purpose of education, we may have 1 billion children or more in failing schools and a world that is beyond salvation. Arthur W. Fauché said in 1991 at the age of 80, he said so insightfully, so I'm going to repeat what he said. The one continuing purpose of education since ancient times has been to bring people to as full a realization as possible of what it is to be a human being. Other statements of educational purpose have been widely accepted: to develop intellect, to serve social needs, to contribute to the economy, to create an effective workforce, to prepare students for a job or a career, to promote a particular social or political system. These purposes offered are undesirably limited in their scope, and they imply a distorted human existence. The broader humanistic purpose includes all of them, and in fact goes beyond them, for it seeks to encompass all the dimensions of the human experience. He said this a quarter of a century ago, and we are yet to listen, it seems. We need to articulate a purpose of education that ensures that not only children, but every human being has the skills and the values to find their passion, their own purpose, to ask the questions that may yield the answers to our greatest problems, and to have the ability to realize happiness for themselves, their families, their communities, their countries, and our world. I urge all of you to vote against this motion.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished members of the chamber, my venerable opponents. I will start by rebutting some of the remarks made by my venerable opponent here, and even thank him for already partly agreeing to the motion that the purpose of education is to ensure children get good jobs when they leave school. So he has greatly reduced my work. I just have to get the rest of him onto this side of the floor. He says that education shouldn't have a purpose to create jobs, that in the technology age, the jobs that will be created are not even present now. And so what are we educating for? But I would like to reassure him that even in the information and technology age that he foresees, there will still be jobs. That will not be eliminated. I don't think that the purpose of creating, the purpose of education being to ensure children get good jobs when they leave school is an archaic one. I think it's a very relevant one, and I think it's a very pragmatic approach. We are not suggesting that there are no other purposes or outcomes from education. No. We're saying that it is the primary purpose is to ensure that children get good jobs. To justify the creation of public schools in the US, the early advocates often emphasized the economic benefits of education. Said, providing education for children of the poor and middle class would prepare them to obtain good jobs, which would in turn reduce disparities in wealth and strengthen the nation's economic growth. Without question, public education has been the engine of upward economic mobility for millions of Americans, and indeed for millions of learners worldwide. I will give a personal story of my father. My father grew up as a peasant. And when the missionaries came to Kenya in the pre-colonial era, when the missionaries were pushing their faith to the locals, one of the methods they used was education. My father was then a beneficiary and taken to a school where he learned to read and write. And fortunately, he excelled in education. So much so that he went on to receive a PhD at the age of 28. And because of the impact that education had on him as an individual, he then went back and started a primary school. And when I asked him, why did you do that? He said, education had such a big impact on me. When my grandfather handed me over to the missionaries in order for me to learn and get an education, he said, please make something of this man. My father believed that by getting that education, he was able to secure a good job, and in turn, to give back to society. He started an institution which he believed would help others get a good education and hopefully ensure good jobs once they left school. Education and the economy are inextricably linked. Employment rates are an important indication of the well-being of the economy. Many studies have shown that there's a significant relationship between educational attainment and employment, and also between education and income levels. Across OECD countries, 83% of employed people have a tertiary education. The figure drops to 74%, and those are those with an upper secondary education, and it becomes even lower to 54% for those who do not have an upper secondary education. In a study done in Kenya of educational attainment and income levels, the study found out that those with no formal education, those with a formal education were between 65 to 70% more likely to get a job than those without an education. And in addition, it found that those with no formal education, 40% of them ended up working in unpaid family work. By building a skilled workforce, education can promote a country from one economic bracket to another. If all students in low-income countries left school with basic reading skills, we could eradicate up to 12% of world poverty, according to one study. Having a good education greatly improves the likelihood of finding a job and earning enough money, according to the OECD Better Life Index. Highly educated individuals are less affected by unemployment trends, typically because educational attainment makes an individual much more attractive in the workforce. College-educated people not only tend to have higher earnings than people without degrees, but they're more likely to enjoy other health and retirement benefits. And having a degree is not just about economic advantage. People with college degrees are more likely to be satisfied with the work and the jobs they do. And they're more likely, as I said earlier, to be healthier. So, education also makes it more likely for men and women to be employed. Yes, in some parts of the world, that might not be a priority. But in the world that we live in and part of the global south and the majority world, education is actually a lifeline, as it provides many with just the basics that they require. Education plays amongst the most critical roles in helping a country improve and sustaining its economic productivity and social quality of life. Both education and the economy are part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in fact, under economy, the target is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Education is perhaps the most critical means of improving this welfare of disadvantaged population, particularly as more of the world enter into the global knowledge. In El Salvador, for instance, only 5% of working adults with less than primary education have an employment contract, compared with 47% of working adults with secondary education. I will leave you with a study that was done by 2013, a Nielsen survey, and it said, the road to better jobs, more money, and improved lifestyles is paved by education. Investing in education is critical to fostering growth and innovation for generations to flow. I therefore urge you to support our motion that the purpose of education is to ensure children get good jobs when they leave school. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will open the floor for us. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker,
Sorry.
thanks a lot. I understand why you were so a bit puzzled, because I was myself listening to our colleague, passionate story about his father, which I think is the best argument to understand why we should vote against. Because at the end of the day, I thought this was a debate about education, and we have to pass legislation about education, not about marketplace, workforce, all these kind of things. I mean, at the end of the day, what we are witnessing nowadays is a sense of, I don't know whether you feel the same that I was feeling while listening to our colleagues here, a sense of fear, a sense of, I mean, we are in this wider context of global economic crisis, of impressive unemployment rates and these kind of things. But if we want to discuss about how we overcome this, we need to understand what is the real sense of education. Our colleague was talking before about good jobs. Of course, everybody wants good jobs. But if you want to have a good jobs, you need good society. So at the end, the purpose of education, the main word here is purpose. We're not talking about whether education is important to get good jobs. Everybody agrees on this, of course. We're talking about what is the purpose of education. And the purpose of education is to create a good society. And for good society, we don't need to manufacture workers. We need to manufacture citizens when we are at the schools. That's the point. There is a small part of the world which used to be a little bit bigger until a few years ago, which is Europe. Now, in Europe, 30 years ago, Europeans thought that, in order to become bigger, stronger, to more forceful in the world and these kind of things, they had to integrate with each other. And they started from economy, they started from the single market and these kind of things. They wanted to create all together. Where do we stand 30 years afterwards? That we have a young generation of Europeans that have grown up with this idea that Europe is only a space for finding a good job, if ever. And now the crisis and the debate, the most advanced debate, we don't need to necessarily to reuse the word used by my colleague about archaic but what is the most advanced debate there in Europe at the moment? That if we focused only on good jobs and growing up children that look around with this idea to find a good job, we go nowhere. Because nowadays in that part of the world you have refugees, you have immigrants, and first and foremost, if you are not able to understand how a new generation can create a different society, then it's pointless to believe that they will be able to create good jobs. So my argument and our argument, the argument of our party, is that education, the purpose of education is essentially to grow up citizens, by which I mean people who can address community issues and community problems. We will never find a way to know what the world will look like in a few years. So we need children with, curiosity, with a sense of being adaptive to the changing world, which is not just a question of technology. It's a question of increasingly question of values as well. So if we move from this point, we may end up eventually to agree on a compromise text where, of course, we put the argument of good jobs in a relevant way, But we cannot start with the main sentence that the purpose of education is good jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, it came to my mind that where is the happiness? How the education can bring the happiness by preparing the student for the market or preparing the student for the goodwill to this life. And also, the children, they are not going to the school just to learn mathematics, Arabic. Also, they go to the school to learn how to live together, how to understand yourself as a human, how to accept the others. This is where the stability that the people need. Look at the Middle East, what happened. The education, when the education failed. Actually, but also there is 100,000 of graduates who don't find job, and the poverty increase, and the economic is down. So, yani, this is also irrational. We will open the question for the floor. So, if someone want to ask, and then we will give 3 minutes to each team. Yeah, here.
I was missing, well, first of all, thank you very much for this topic. I was missing an important issue. So my name is Friederike Sösen. I come from the Austrian Chamber. My name is Friederike Sösen. I am from the Austrian Chamber. And I was missing one important point. So in our belief, it is about life skills. So we have key competences, but they include the notion of an entrepreneurial mindset, about being able to find employment, and also being ready for self-employment. So life skills, they do include happiness, they include social competences, but it is most important. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I want my children to be employable or to be able to set up their own company. Thank you.
We want a question, not comments on that.
Well, basically, it's about where do you see entrepreneurship in this context?
Okay. From this side, I saw. Okay. We will take 2. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tendai Mtana from Kenya. I want to ask the opposition, where is the place for economic empowerment when the world is full of rhetoric about people living in the world below $1 a day? How can we not be talking about school for work when an entire generation doesn't actually have economic empowerment?
Thank you very much. So we will try to answer the first question, and then the important.
Do you want to take entrepreneurship? We can take the second one.
Okay.
We'll take both. We're going to take both.
All right. Well, we'll take one and then we'll figure it out. Thank you. Great point, great question. And I think it actually speaks to part of the argument that we're actually very much making, in that good jobs is about a safe and sustainable livelihood, which may very well include being an entrepreneur, being entrepreneurial, working, finding a way to support yourself and create your own opportunity. And we think part of that education in order to prepare for those good jobs do include life skills, do include many of the kinds of attributes that our esteemed and worthy opponents rose. And you mentioned in your question the idea about communication and teamwork and tolerance and respect for each other. Those are all skills that we know are being demanded by the workplace today. So actually, again, it speaks to our very point about the primary purpose of education being to prepare children in all aspects for all aspects of what good jobs are, which may very well include working for themselves. Thank you.
just a couple of remarks. I mean, the first one is that we are talking about entrepreneurship, not enterprise necessarily. So again, I mean, of course, everybody wants, we need to grow up children that are able to promote, to be empowered, self-empowered, to have self-employment, to look for self-employment, to start up companies and these kind of things. But we also need children that are able to be entrepreneurial citizens. So it depends on how wide you see the approach. And we believe that, of course, in the second one, you can put the first one. In active citizens and entrepreneurial citizens, you can also develop those skills about entrepreneurship in the street sense of the word. Whereas, we believe that the motion of our opponents doesn't work the other way around. And the second point is that, take for instance, a country that recently passed an important school reform, which is a small country in Southern Europe. and there, I mean, they put last year 3 billion euros in the reform. And a significant part of the money goes to supporting students with entrepreneurship and developing this kind of skills with, for instance, allowing students and pupils to have experience in the job market, in companies and firms and these kind of things. But at the end of the day, the philosophy of that reform, and I think the philosophy, which is not just a strange word in the air, is the basis on which we built up reforms and policies at the end of the day, including for this chamber, is that we need to rebuild society. Because otherwise you can have all the entrepreneurs you want, you can have all the firms you want, we will not be able to collectively face a number of issues and a number of challenges and global challenges. So that's our simple point. So I believe you should move on this other side of the...
If I can just pick up, if I can just pick up the point about economic, just about economic empowerment. I think certainly one of the things that's worth articulating again to members of the House is that the idea that jobs were the primary purpose of education is a dated notion. That's certainly the efficiency-driven component that we've been hearing since the industrial age. The reality is that isn't the world that we live in today. Yesterday, Fareed Zakaria said that even in developing nations, routine order jobs in factories that would have looked at a typical labor force are experiencing a higher, more accelerated level of automation than ever before. The reality is that when we look at specific individual jobs that we're training our people for, we must be prepared for a future where that job may have a very, very short shelf life. So then when we talk about what is the primary purpose of education, you must focus on not the job, but what are those transferable skills, qualities, and values that will transcend a particular job. You know, the old adage of, I'm going to be an engineer, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to end up in business. That silo-driven view of the market and the global economy is dissipating, is being disrupted. Why can you not be both a doctor and an engineer and an entrepreneur, a leader of people and a leader of communities? So not for me to say that economic empowerment for those that are living on less than $2 a day is not important. But if we look at it in the very myopic sense that we have done over the last 100 years, then we are doomed to fail. We must look at what the future holds for our young people, and we must change the nature in which we choose to educate them.
Thank you.
I once again thank my speaker for agreeing with our motion. So I hope that was the other half. We are not disputing the fact that the education system may be failing. The education system is not perfect. It has its defects, just like the labor market does. And the talk about the skills, knowledge, and the values are things that can be adapted in an education system that can be incorporated. These points are not mutually exclusive. And I don't think that is why education's purpose is diminished simply because our current education system is not working. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take just one question.
Actually, it's not a question. It's just a comment about
Now, we need a
entrepreneurship.
question for
Okay.
that. Can we take? Okay. Here, in the left.
Alexander Nikitic from Carfax Education. It's a question for the proposition. Here now and throughout this forum, we've been focusing and talking a lot about the education for the disadvantaged, and yet we're forgetting about a very small but important minority of the advantaged children. In the context of this debate, children who do not need jobs. Would you say that those children who do not need jobs do not need education?
Excellent question. Excellent.
What do you?
Yeah,
We can support you, eh?
right. I guess, I mean, I'm struck, I maybe just, I don't know so many people in my life who have this luxury of not necessarily needing or wanting a job. I think, you know, again, the purpose of education is to prepare young people for good jobs that help them find meaning and sustainability in their life. And I think that the skills that we impart through education will help people find meaning in life, become good citizens, and create that greater society that we agree with our opponents we are all in desperate need of. But but training and educating children for good jobs will still impart that sense of meaning and the skills and that sense of worth and society and cooperation that whether they end up with a job or not will still help them, their families, and society.
Thank you. Sorry, we will not be out of time. This is the question is the education should meet the learner's need, the political system needs, the market needs, the heritage the needs. That's why we said that the vision of education should be developed by the society. When you have education vision from the society, then the road will be clear. I would like to thank the team. They were very well structured, very good, quiet. Like yesterday, it was, and this is my first time to be a speaker. I like it very much. Like, it's good to feel like a president. Who knows, maybe I will be the president of Palestine one day. We will see how the audience and what they will support. So we will open the vote now. Oh my God. Yeah. But we will open the vote after the 3 minutes of each team. And the vote we will compare your vote in the beginning and your vote at the end. Then we will see votes. So we will, before that, we will give each team 3 minutes. One of each team will summarize his vision. And this is where you want to convince the audience to be able to support you or other. So, please.
Lucky me. Well, thank you again. And really, I have to thank our opponents because, again, we believe that they helped make our case for us. And we're going to summarize and I think drive this home with an analogy. We submit that many members of this chamber may have gone to the gym this morning. They may have gone to the gym and exercised and felt a variety of benefits, right? Maybe they are exercising to lose weight, maybe to sleep better, maybe to prepare in case they need to run out of bear on their next camping trip, or whatever it is, be in the Olympics. But, as we submit, depending on what the primary purpose, what brought them to that gym, is it to lose weight? Is it to sleep better? Is it to outrun a bear? Will necessarily define the kind of exercise that they do, the nature of their training, the nature of the process by which they are getting on that better path. And this, my friends, is at the heart of the argument of our motion. We don't disagree that there are many benefits to education, to creating empowered young people in society, both economically and also civically. But we believe that those benefits can all be found from training and ensuring and educating young people and children to succeed, to have jobs, and that the other benefits are mutually reinforcing. Thank you, and we very much urge you to vote for this motion.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we try to break convention and conventional thinking on this side of the House. So if you would permit us, we will be less than 3 minutes, but both myself and my colleague would like to close in sequence, if that's okay. Quite simply, the greatest minds in the world have a view on the purpose of education, and they all seem to agree with this side of the House, and I really had to search frantically to figure out which quotation to end with. But I'm going to use Martin Luther King, great man. And he said, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but no morals. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." My colleague, now to close with one sentence.
Thanks a lot, Dino. I have three things to say. The first one is that we take time. The first one is that you were mentioning about sport and people doing this morning. I was thinking about skydiving in Dubai. Now, at the end of the day, the difference is whether you believe that skydiving on the palm, the purpose is to get on the ground or to learn how to fly. The more serious argument is that the difference between our colleagues and us is whether you believe that schools and education should answer the question, what do you want to do in life, rather than the question, who do you want to be in life? You saw before that we are 53% against 47%. 53 for them and 47 for us. So Dino and I urge you to think carefully before you vote, because this is a critical juncture in the history of our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, we will now vote. There is one agree and two disagree. And you, if you can see, this is the first. Can we show the first result?
Yeah, it was 57 to 43.
53, 47.
Can we show the first result?
We must have moved the needle. Surely. You win if you move the needle, right? Not when you're wrong.
Yeah, it is the 153. What and 47.
This was the first one.
Agree 53 and disagree 47. Now let us to start to vote to see and compare now after the discussion.
Remember, we played the rules.
Start, we have 10 seconds. One agree, two disagree.
I'm really doing it like American Idol when you count in a few times, you just keep pressing. I hope you're pressing two. You're pressing one or two.
Wow! This is shown. Thank you. It's shown really how they influence the floor. This is very important.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That was Italian.
Thank you very much. Thank you.